Okay. First up and foremost, I would like to welcome Craig Custance, also my boss. Tell him nice things about me. Craig is the editor-in-chief for the Athletics NHL coverage in the U.S. Before joining the Athletic, he was a senior NHL writer for ESPN.com. He is also the author of the book Behind the Bench, Inside the Mind of Hockey's Greatest Coaches, which you should read, and host of the Full 60 podcast, which you should listen to. Joining Craig, I'm looking here at the order that we've got. Well, we'll just start down. Where will we go? I'll just go in the order my notes are. I've only had one coffee. Joining Craig are Arik Parnass. Arik has worked as a hockey analyst for the Colorado Avalanche for the past 4 seasons in Denver. He grew up in Montreal and attended Georgetown University, following which he spent a year working on a large-scale tracking initiative called the Special Teams Project, publishing statistical and video-based insight on power plays around the league. Richard Dry is also with us. His background is in elite sports data strategies and software development. In 1994, he developed the first dedicated player development system targeting English Premier Soccer clubs and academies. Following that success, his work spread into international rugby and soccer. He went on to be one of the founding members of what is now Edge 10, where he consulted across a wide variety of sports, including soccer, rugby, track and field, motor racing, hockey, basketball, cricket, summer and winter Olympic sports, and for national governing bodies. In 2015, he became the Director of Sports Technology for Madison Square Garden, where he continues to drive data projects for the Rangers and the New York Knicks. We also have Tom Poraszka, who is the Hockey Operations Analyst with the Vegas Golden Knights. In his role, Tom supports Vegas management staff in strategy, player personnel decisions, contract negotiations, drafting, and player development. And last but certainly not least, we have Zach Urback from the Columbus Blue Jackets. He is the team's hockey analyst. This is his first year working full-time with the organization after he had been working with them part-time for the last few seasons. Prior to joining the Blue Jackets, Zach was the Director of Player Evaluation and Assistant to the GM for the Mississauga Steelheads. Let's welcome our panel, please.
Oh, Rich, I'm glad your bio was bought us 5 extra minutes here while we get mics. So I'm going to start, and I've been doing this for analytics conferences, for journalism conferences, and one of I know very practical things that people wonder when they're looking on stage, and I look out at this crowd and I see people who are ambitious and are probably thinking, boy, I would love to be on the stage one day. I would love to be working for an NHL team. And just simply knowing the process or the story behind how you ended up with the Rangers or how you ended up with the Blue Jackets, I think is valuable information. So I wanted to start there with just the personal story. We did get 20 minutes of it from Rich's bio, but let's start and work our way down. How did you end up working for MSG?
Well, I mean, it started off. I started off in 1995 as a software developer and targeting player development in soccer clubs, and that kind of ballooned across multiple sports around the world, really. And I ended up on a project working for Madison Square Garden for the Knicks and the Rangers, driven by Mr. Dolan, the owner. And as a part of that, after 2 years as a consultant, an opportunity arose that I decided to take. And it's 5 years, actually, nearly to the day. And I've never looked back. It's a terrific opportunity.
That's great. Tom?
Oh, you want to go?
Sure.
Oh, sorry.
So my story, many of you may already know. I started a salary cap website when Cap Geek, the founder, he passed away and his site shut down, unfortunately. So I started one myself, and then that kind of gained some traction and some popularity. And shortly thereafter, the Vegas Golden Knights became a franchise. I got in touch with some of the people that worked there, and from that got an opportunity. So it was a little bit of timing, a little bit of luck, but I think part of it was also just kind of getting something out into the public space that you worked hard on and you were passionate about. And when teams see that, they see an opportunity for someone that has a skill set that they might not have.
Sorry, Arik.
That's okay. Yeah, so I mean, a little bit similar to Tom in the sense I was doing some work in the public sphere, sort of in college and coming out of college. I've always been passionate about this sport, growing up in Canada, and loved innovation as well, and anything that was new and coming into fashion, and that's sort of where analytics were when I was taking classes in college and learning a little more about that side of the game and how much it can enlighten us all. And help with our evaluation of players and teams and everything like that. So I'd been doing a lot of blogging, some of my own statistical work. I did a few internships and was sort of just in the right place at the right time when the Avalanche came calling, and now been with them for 4 years. So it all sort of worked out right in terms of timing.
So initially I wanted to be an agent, and I was going to law school, and I thought that was the natural sort of progression for someone who was really passionate about hockey. And I started working with various agencies and really quickly learned I don't want to be an agent. I'm sorry if there's any agents in this room. But yeah, very quickly I realized that, but I had an awesome opportunity when I was working with various agencies because they really encouraged me to learn more about hockey analytics, how it can be used to help player development, how it can be used to help in contract negotiations and in player evaluation, player progression. And that really provided me with a platform to sort of train and learn and bounce ideas off of really intelligent people. And from there, things just sort of started to snowball as I realized I didn't want to be an agent, but I got involved with the junior hockey team, the Mississauga Steelheads, and worked for them for quite a while, and ended up working for the Columbus Blue Jackets, which has been an unbelievable opportunity.
So a couple of you guys have had kind of public-facing, I don't know, personas, or we knew you before you disappeared. Some of you didn't. Well, I would just be curious how important you feel it is to be out there in the public sphere before you have kind of the dream job.
Well, I mean, I think it's super important. Obviously, there's different paths that everyone can take. But, I mean, the public is great because there's so many sets of eyes to take a look at your stuff, to critique your stuff, to give you feedback. I started out without a big statistical background. I really learned everything that I know through, doing my own research, publishing analysis, getting feedback on that analysis from really smart people in the public sphere, from people in hockey who are really smart as well, and using that combination of feedback to make sure, the next study I do, the next article I publish is better than the last one. And that's really something that, working for a team is great. You do get that kind of feedback in some sense, certainly from the hockey standpoint, but you do kind of lose a little bit that, you don't necessarily have the statistical rigor depending on your setup. But that's really what's great about the public. As supportive and great as people are out there, people in stats, people in science are always looking to find an error, find something that's wrong with what you're doing. It's the nature of the beast. It's what makes the field so great. So doing stuff in the public, getting your work out there, having something to your name, really helps you, not just in that sense, but also in the communication sense, which is so important to work for a team, to be able to communicate your ideas, and getting feedback and experience in that, I think, is critical.
Did you drop the mic, Arik? Was that what that was?
I hit it against.
It was a little early for that, I think.
Yeah, it's early for everything.
I would share a lot of that. I think the biggest thing about doing things in the public space is that there's so many people that want these jobs, and so anything that you can do to kind of separate yourself is so big. We get resumes all the time of people that are interested in the job and say that they can do these things and do these things, but it means so much more when they've already done them. And if you're already getting value out of the things that they're doing, then it's a lot easier to form a relationship with those people, rely on them for certain things, and then potentially look to them when an opportunity arises. And I think the biggest thing is, like, when you're doing something for the public space that's different than anyone else is doing, if you're passionate about it, that comes out in what you're doing, but you also learn a lot by doing it because you've got an audience that's taking in your work. So you've got to appeal to that audience, you've got to adjust and make changes and all that sort of stuff to kind of build that following and all that sort of thing. So that all that kind of forms a relationship with your end user, which if your goal is to get a job with a team, your end user is a team, and you kind of learn that kind of side of it. So I think anything you can do that you're passionate about and you enjoy doing, I would recommend doing, because it'll get your name out there for sure.
Rich, how similar is hockey versus the NBA kind of makeup of the analytics crowd and the paths that people take?
Yeah, I mean, analytics is driven by the data that you have. So, you know, in hockey, we're limited to, not limited to, but we have an infinite supply of, you know, data from SportLogic or from the HITS database and other sort of areas that we can get a hold of. And that compared to basketball, to the NBA, you know, we have data 25 times a second about every player and the ball on the court for every game that's being played. So we could actually go in and recreate every single game played in the last 5 or 6 years and reanimate those games and do some deeper stuff. So from that standpoint, I mean, we don't do that, by the way.
Sounds fun. I want to do it.
From that standpoint, I mean, you know, there is so much you can do, and what we tend to do at MSG is we'll look at the basketball data and cross-compare and say, well, what are we doing for the Knicks that we could, you know, cross over onto the Rangers, and vice versa. I mean, it all counts.
Yeah. So, and we'll get to that in a minute. The player tracking coming is going to change that, I think, in the NHL, or at least make it a little closer to the NBA. But I am curious. I had a conversation with a GM, and he said, you know, I think there's sometimes some frustration within hockey front office about the certainty that public analysts have about their information, and they'll say, hey, this, I can't believe how stupid this GM is, and you know, based on whatever public information they're using. And he said, what you guys have is the equivalent of watching a game with the lights out, and occasionally you turn the light on and you turn it out, and occasionally you turn the light on and you turn it out. And he was contending that their information was much more advanced, and so we couldn't draw great conclusions with the information we had, which I thought was an interesting way to put it. But I'm curious, when talking to you guys in preparation for this, you are using a lot of the public data. You are reading a lot of the work of the people watching this. So how different is it? How much different is the information that you're looking at, and how closely are you looking at the public information?
Go for it.
Oh, Arik. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, we rely very heavily on the information we're given, and we look at that information from a raw level, and we have our own, you know, philosophies and things that we care about as a club, as a team, and on a daily basis we'll look at those and we'll respond to those. But there are also other good articles done by, you know, all of you people out there that we look at as well, and it's about enabling knowledge. You know, we have opinions and conclusions that we come to that we support with data and with articles that are written out there.
Yeah. Go ahead, Arik.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I think it's part of my job to follow what's going on in the public, and there's a lot of good work being done there. The way I kind of see it is that there's this sort of holy grail, unreachable target of sort of player evaluation, which is out there. And we all kind of dance around it and circle around it and do our best job to try and get there, whether it's current players or prospects or whatever. But, you know, we also have to recognize that, you know, we're probably never going to get there. We're just going to get as close as we can. But what you end up seeing is everybody has their own kind of quote-unquote model for player evaluation, whether that's a statistical model, whether that's some combination of the eye test or video analysis or character analysis or all these other things that go into it. And all of these quote-unquote models are kind of dancing around this target. And what you end up with is, even if, you know, we have faith in our own model, whether it's our own Colorado Avalanche scouts, our own statistical evaluation, there are still going to be players that, you know, because of the decisions we make or how we value certain things, we may be wrong about, and there may be a model out there in the public or a certain person's perspective, the way they do their video analysis, that they're going to be able to identify some player that we couldn't identify. So I think it's important to be humble enough to recognize that even though we may feel like what we have is the best thing out there, that there are going to be things that we're going to be wrong about, that people out there in the public are going to be right about. So to take all that information in, to use it, to consider it along with what we have, lends value to all of us, for any team, and to recognize that if you're ignoring that, you're missing a chunk of the pie.
Yeah, I'd be curious your guys' thoughts.
Yeah, in terms of the caliber of the data, I think that it's good enough to identify trends, but not to tell you rules. If any of you have ever watched a junior hockey game when it's looked like it's filmed through a potato and it's really grainy, you can still watch that game and identify who are the best players and who are the worst players. You can see the goals, you can see the assists, you can get an idea of what's going on the ice. But you don't necessarily see the details. And that sort of data is similar to what the public's dealing with, where you can identify a lot of the better players and the worst players. You'll make some mistakes, you'll generally be accurate. But in a league where there's so much concentration on details, the details make an enormous difference. So the caliber of the data now the NHL teams may be dealing with is more similar to watching a game from home, from your couch, in high definition. But what we're still not at is the point where you're watching games live in person in the rink. And player tracking is going to get us a little bit closer to that, but it's still not quite there. And just because you're watching a game in a rink scouting doesn't mean that you're able to see everything that went on and be 100% accurate. There's still value in, after you scouted a game in person, going back and watching the game footage. That's the analogy I'm trying to get at here, is that even if you have the top data in the private sphere, there's still value in going back to the public and saying, well, maybe I need a sober second thought here for a minute. So really what we're saying is the public data is useful. It's not perfect. It's not going to lead to 100% accurate conclusions, but neither is the data that NHL teams are currently dealing with, and neither is the data that NHL teams will be dealing with in the future. There's always going to be a difference in opinion, in evaluation, and in details. So the general trends are there currently in the public sphere, but the details aren't quite there yet.
Yeah, I think you guys have said most of what can be said. I think the big thing with public data is that it's, excuse me, it's not as rich as some of the stuff that's out there for teams that teams pay for or develop on their own or whatever, or the league might be introducing in the future. But that's not to say that it's not useful and you can't do really interesting things with it. Coming into working in the hockey industry, it's kind of amazing how much work is done for you by public analysts for free or for a very low price. So as someone who works for a team, your time is, you only have so much time and can only explore so many ideas and so many things. So if you didn't pay attention to what public analysts are doing, you're kind of wasting a free resource. And so I think while some of our data sets might be richer, I think there's still so much that can be explored with the public data set and so much that can continue to be done, and we see that every day with some of the work that the public analysts are doing. And yeah, I just think that in terms of differences of opinions, I think one of the things that public analysts should keep in mind is that you may not have all the information. So, and that might not be with respect to sort of different data sets. These are people that you're working with. There's interactions with those people that happen. Sometimes those things influence decisions, and there's a variety of other things that go into every decision that's made in the hockey space, and sometimes that information just isn't available to the public and can't be made available to the public. So.
All right, so Rich kind of gave us a hint at what they are getting on the NBA side. I think you said you get every player and the location of every player and every ball 25 times a second, and you have the data for the last 5 years in the NBA. Is that right?
For every game.
For every game. That's a mountain of data, and that's what hopefully is coming to the NHL at some point. We've been promised, I think, by the playoffs now. This is the latest. So, and I know there's some concern that sometimes there's almost too much data. Like, what do you do with all of that? What form is it coming in? And I would just be curious, what's been your approach in handling all that?
Well, it is a lot of data, and you got to look at what's useful. What's useful and what's cool. What necessarily is cool isn't necessarily useful. We could go and reanimate every single game and watch dots on a screen and go, that's cool. Doesn't tell me anything. So, you need to read between the lines and maybe look at, and I was thinking about actually when you guys were talking about, with SportLogic, SportLogic describe a game in about 3,500 to 4,000 rows of data. And that is every single puck touch, every single, contested puck, and, puck carry, and anyone who is contesting the puck carrier. But it doesn't tell us about what's happening off the puck. It doesn't tell us about the other 8 players on the rink. And I think that, to me, is where the gold is. And it's actually working out, the movement of players off the puck. We're so tied into looking at the puck carrier right now. And I think that's where we need to take this.
So using the lights off in the arena analogy, that's basically you have a spotlight on the puck carrier with the data, and you're not getting it. So let's assume now we flip a switch and we're getting the data for the location of every player on the ice, not with where they're at when everything's happening. I would be curious, given that data, what would you want to do with it? What would be the first thing you would attack?
Yeah, I mean, I think to piggyback a little bit off what Rich said, I think that the denser the data you have is, the bigger difference there is between what's cool and what's useful for a team. I think, right away there's going to be a lot you can dive into that'll be interesting for a viewer, interesting for a reader. Things that we talk about like top speed, passing efficiency, let's say. I think the important thing to remember right off the bat is that, as soon as you get that first game of tracking, it's going to be super cool, and you're going to have one game tracked. And I think the most important piece of what you described before, Craig, is not the 25 pieces of data a second, it's the 5 years worth of data. And so I think, it's a good question to say what's the first thing you would dive into. I think, unfortunately, the realistic answer is not much. I think the way that teams are going to have to approach this, especially as an analyst coming at it from that perspective, is we kind of have to wait and see. I certainly have ideas of what I'd like to do with the data, how we can improve our current models, how we can improve our current evaluation, help our coaching staffs, things like that. But we're not going to know exactly how important some of this stuff is and quite how much it's going to help us until we have it. So there isn't really an easy answer to, I'm going to get, the first set of games of data on, let's say, October 4th, and suddenly we're going to be in a totally new age of analysis. I think it's closer to a more gradual, progressive climb. It's definitely exciting. I don't want to throw water on that, but
yeah, geez, we've been waiting for 10 years for this moment.
But I think part of that, like I said, I think it's going to be more exciting or more actionable in terms of interesting nuggets, stuff on broadcast, stuff in the public sphere, more quickly than it will be for people like us. And it will certainly be super valuable for people like us. It may just take a little more time. It's not necessarily going to mean that suddenly, no bad trade is ever going to be made again because we have, we start getting tracking data.
So, Zach, I'd be curious, Zach. To me, I think there's so much opportunity for strategy, in-game strategy. If you know where every player on the ice is when a goal is scored, and you start noticing trends, versus you mentioned roster construction or bad trades. To me, it becomes an in-game strategy thing. Like, you guys are in front offices. I'm sure you're pitching things to coaches or whatever those conversations look like. How open do you think to use Jarmo's the hockey guys phrase or whatever it was, like how open is it? Are they going to be to say, hey, we have all this tracking data. It's clear if this guy never enters his zone or something random, there's a benefit. Like, how do you see that playing out?
I think that it's definitely going to get us a lot closer in terms of positioning, off puck play, and systems and whatnot. But there's always going to be an appetite for more. Like Jarmo said, we don't have the feel of the players. We don't have the intuition. We don't have when we get tracking data, what we're going to have is we're going to have puck tracking and jersey tracking. What we won't have is stick tracking. And why that's important is guys have different stick positioning. Players can use their reach differently. And there's always going to be an appetite for more details. Some players can pass it, hit you right in the sweet spot on your stick and can set you up for that perfect one-timer. And others might not be able to do so to the same extent. And when you speak to coaches, when you speak to people in hockey, the level of detail and understanding and feel they have for the game is unbelievable. And there's always going to be an appetite for more detail. But at the same time, I think that there's also going to be an appetite to actually use this information in a more meaningful way than it's being used in now, because you have richer data, you have the ability to answer more nuanced questions, to analyze things from a more micro perspective. But I think that when you're dealing with player evaluation and coaching tactics, they're very different in terms of what you're analyzing, what you're looking for, and the types of things that you need to be cognizant of. So at the end of the day, I think it will lead to more buy-in. It will lead to more people willing to use the data, but it's also going to lead to an appetite for more information, and I think that's awesome.
Tom, what are you looking forward to the most when this data starts to hit your front office?
All the work that it's going to create. Honestly, like I think there's going to be, like Arik said, there's going to be a lot of low-hanging fruit that a lot of teams will be able to tackle pretty quickly, and it might replace some of the things that you're kind of you're measuring with a more of a qualitative measure currently. You might be able to do it better with a quantitative measure in the future. But like with the NBA, I don't, as far as I know, they haven't cracked it. They don't have the answer for how to construct a team the best, or who the best players are 100% of the time. That's going to be the same way in hockey, but like what we've seen with the data that's currently available in the public space or internally to teams is that our knowledge has grown exponentially over the last 5 to 10 years, and I think it will continue to do that the same way with any new technology. But I think in terms of your question with coaching or other staff, I think the biggest thing is it's not dependent on the information that they're getting. It's dependent on the relationship that you have with those people, how much they trust you, and how much you have built that relationship, fostered it, and gained their trust to believing what you're presenting. Like, it's not always that you have the absolute answer. It's, I have a suspicion based on this, or I've analyzed this, I'm seeing this. It might be right, it might not be right. Here's why it might be right, here's why it might not be right. I think the biggest thing with trying to get people in hockey to adopt some of these things is building that trust, and the common expression is beg for forgiveness rather than ask for permission. I think with the work that we do, it should be the opposite. You need to gain that trust. If you do it the wrong way, you might not get a second opportunity. So it's really important to kind of build that trust and that relationship in order to get some of these things recognized and put into action.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, and I would be curious to get your thoughts on how do you proactively reach out to build those relationships so that when you do find a discovery or you do find something, or maybe there's a go-between in your front office where it's like, I never see the coach. You know what I mean? I report to this person. Like, what do those inter-office relationships look like when you're trying to share data and improve the team?
Well, for the Knicks, we have an analyst. I'm not an analyst by trade. I'm a data architect, and he will work with the front office and it's actually got better over the last few years. The coaching department and the front office will come and seek answers and create projects. And on the Rangers side, you know, I respond to, again, requests, which is put through our director of hockey analytics, and he has a team who actually runs the analytics. So, but all those requests come down from the front office or from the coaching department, or they might even just be like hearsay. There might be, you know, so and so mentioned this. Let's do something in that regard. There's just not the time and not the space to go and say, look what we found. This is really, really cool. You know, you've only got, it's like spending time with your kids before they go to school in the morning. You know, you've got 35 minutes to pack the lunch and get them out the door.
So pure chaos at all times? Is
Absolutely.
That just me?
Absolutely, yeah. So, you know, you take what you can get and you respond to it, and you just try and do the best job you can and try and get as near to what they're asking.
Yeah. How about you, Arik? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult for sure. You know, I think there's a couple keys. I mean, one of them is just time. It takes time to build trust. It takes time to build relationships, and you have to be willing to put in that time. I think going into it, and this isn't necessarily just with coaches, but with anybody, you know, going into it with the mindset of wanting to learn, of not feeling like you have all the answers, and not coming off as if you feel like you know you have all the answers. You know, one thing, like, this might be a controversial statement, but coaches are really smart. I know it doesn't always come off that way on Twitter with all the criticisms you see, but you know, that's one of the things I've really learned through this job through 4 years now is, you know, if you go in and you want to make a pitch to a coach or you want to present some data, you better know your stuff. You better be ready to take any question that might come. You better not have any flaws with what you're thinking about. You better have thought about it from every angle, from a hockey perspective, even from a statistical perspective, because, you know, they might listen for 5 minutes and then point out if there's three flaws you thought no one would ever see, they'll find them. I've found that generally, if you go in with all those things, if you have the right attitude about it, that you don't act like, you know, this is the answer to all their problems, that it might just be part of the solution, that it's just information for them to use however they want, and you've done the work and you've practiced it and you've put in the time to make sure that it's really airtight, they're super open-minded to it. I've found that to be, you know, at least in my experience, I can't speak for everybody, but you know, I've had nothing but great time spent with coaches and with our coaching staff in terms of, you know, presenting them with information, having them use that information, them coming back and telling us what they'd like to see, what would be useful for them, whether it's on a pre or post game level, whether it's analyzing players specifically, and it leads to great dialogue. I've learned a lot about the game, about watching the game, and about analyzing the game just through their eyes, and so, you know, like I said, it takes time to build that trust, and you can't force it.
How about you, Zach? What does that look like in Columbus?
Well, I think what's been set up here is pretty much what I would get at. It's really, I'm trying to listen and not lecture when I'm having conversations with people. You learn an incredible amount of information when you talk to someone who's an expert in their field. And people who are working in hockey are experts. When they watch games, they see things that I don't see if I watch a game 10 times and watch the highlight of the same play. I don't see it the same way as someone else, because they have a different feel, a different sense of intuition, and a different perspective as well, right? Because just because someone feels a certain way doesn't mean that's the answer or not. But at the end of the day, I like to trust the people in hockey for their opinions less than their facts, because the numbers are your facts, but the opinions that experts in the field have are unbelievably well nuanced. And you can learn a ton from just listening to someone rather than lecturing them. I think that our organization has been unbelievable in terms of the buy-in that we've received from various different parties. It's not just myself. There's other people in the organization who've been doing it before me, doing it alongside me. And so it's not as if I came in this year and it was all brand new. But from what I've seen and what the experience I've had is, as long as you're listening to people and you want to discuss and you all have the common goal of helping a hockey team and not of trying to prove that you know more than them and that your opinion or your sense is better than theirs, there shouldn't be much pushback in terms of gaining buy-in. I'm sure at the individual level, there's certain scouts, there's certain coaches, there's certain managers that are more and less susceptible to being influenced by numbers. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is make better informed decisions using data rather than use data to drive our decisions. And I think because of that, there is good buy-in. Every single event that a scout sees, that a coach sees, or that we receive from a data set is a form of information. And collectively, that is what forms our analytics. It's not just straight out of a spreadsheet and that's our analytics. It's collectively using information.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I would add is that part of our job as analysts is to know your audience. So people learn things differently and interpret things differently and accept new information differently. So get to know the people that you're working with and how they best accept information and act on it. And that could mean just the way you deliver the message. Some people like to just learn through conversation. Other people like to see colors and graphs, and other people like to receive a whole data dump and dive into the numbers themselves. So you kind of have to learn those things as you get to know the people that you're working with and the decision makers. And I think you also have to respect other people's time. So GMs and coaches are incredibly busy people, and they have a lot of information that they're getting thrown at them every single day. And so if you want your information to be useful and actionable for them, then you have to present it in a way that they can digest it. So I think that was one of the things that Josh said as part of this conference. He wanted things to be actionable and digestible. And as an analyst working for a hockey team, that's something that you have to keep a focus on every single day.
All right, to wrap up, I'm gonna add a bonus question, because kind of inspired by Jarmo ended saying, you know, a few words that I think in the analytics community people have a hard time wrapping their head around instinct, character, compete, and heart. Like that's really tough to measure. And when you talk to people in analytics, they're like, you can measure everything. Like there is nothing, if we get enough data, these are some of the things that there's got to be a way to translate. I would say compete would be an interesting one. So I know I'm putting you on the spot. We didn't talk about it in this, but I'd be curious if any of you have any thoughts on something like character or compete and what that looks like.
100110. No, I mean what we tend to do is it's not a numbers game. It really isn't. What we try and do is we'll point things out and we'll go our own way and do our own sort of run of numbers and run of patterns that we're interested in. But ultimately, we always point back to the video. Everything we do is supported by video, and we are. You can't coach by numbers, and you can't scout by numbers, and you can't recruit by numbers alone. So everything points back to the individual, the circumstance, the situation, and the humans, and a number will always point back to that for us.
That's interesting. You can paint by numbers, though.
Not me.
Arik, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to not just look at the what, but look at the why. I think stuff like hard and compete, that's a foundational element of our game. There's no doubt about that. But I think a lot of that stuff manifests itself in material ways in terms of some of it can be measured because we know that players who compete hard tend to have better results, tend to help their teams win. There's an element of that plays into just knowing who the best players are and being as good as you can and having the best data possible to try and measure that. And then the other element of it is sort of in a projecting sense. These things matter, especially when it comes to younger players and prospects and projecting, because the players that work harder, the players that have that character, are going to spend the time to become better players. So having that knowledge, and both knowing how it impacts you in your current game on the ice allows your team to generate more chances, more goals when you're out there and allow less and win hockey games. And then also seeing, if this player works harder, if this player has better character, they're going to be able to translate that element of their game more to the next level. So I do think there's elements of this that we can't quantify. There are elements of this that we may never be able to quantify. But it's also important to frame not just in a very, in a vacuum sense, what does this mean, but to be able to really dial down into why do we feel compete is important above and beyond what we've been able to quantify, and how does that then factor into who we're going to draft, who we're going to sign, and all those other questions.
Well, I had one analytics skeptic say, you know what analytic I want? I want, if I put a puck in the corner, how many times the guy comes out with it. I'm like, wait, I feel like that's very measurable. I don't know if I've seen that stat, but I'm like, he's like, yeah, that's compete. And I'm like, no, we can count. I feel like we can. I don't know. I'm not an expert. How about you guys?
Yeah, I think the argument analysts would make is that if compete matters, it would show up in the numbers in terms of the end result, and it does. So what we may see in the numbers when we run our models or do regression analysis or whatever it is, we may see something that we're not necessarily calling compete, or we may see results that are a result of a player being more competitive or stronger or has more quote-unquote heart, but we might not be calling it that. And by we, I mean public analysts or whoever. But I think as we get more sophisticated in the models that we build, those are things that we will be able to quantify better and better. But at some point, there's always going to be an element of validating those suspicions in the data that we have by actually watching these players. And I think that's something that you can't ever forget, that there's value to always watching the games and seeing the players on the ice, because there's things that the numbers tell us or lead to conclusions that we should always try to validate by watching as well.
Just to wrap us up really quickly, I see Allison's holding up the 1 minute sign.
I'm so nervous. Allison, geez, we're almost done.
I'm going to quickly agree and disagree with everything that's been said, just because I think that, yes, you can indirectly measure things like competitiveness and heart and character. But at the same time, I think that there's two ways of having an organization, and that's one that's filled with individuals and one that plays as a team and that is a team. And in terms of evaluating that, sure, that might show up in their results and whatnot, but all the inputs and how they interact with one another are situational. So just because you bring in one person who's known for being a high character person, that doesn't mean that now suddenly your organization scores 42 out of 100 on character. And you add one more and now it's 59. It doesn't work like that. It interacts as a team. And I think that our team this season has been an unbelievable example of that, when you see everyone willing to stick up for one another, playing as a team and not as a group of individuals. And sure, you might not be able to identify which individual is responsible for it, because it might not be any individual. It might be a collective effort. And that makes it incredibly difficult to actually identify who is responsible for what, if anyone is, and to determine how valuable that person is. Because, like I said, I think everything is really situational. So yes, it will show up, but at the same time, you won't necessarily know why or what it's causing.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being the first panel before everyone's coffee kicks in. You guys are very brave. Thank you so much, everybody.